A Promise Under the Rain. Subscribe. Don't miss out on more stories that will touch your heart. Leave a like and a comment below about what you think of this story. And don't forget to share it with someone who loves a good tale of love and redemption. She raised an abandoned baby without knowing his father was a rich man. Years later, she fell in love with him. During a cold, relentless November night, the sound of the rain lashing against the sterile hospital windows mixed with the hurried footsteps of Sarah. The night shift in the emergency room rarely offered a break, and this night was no exception. Sarah, a dedicated and generous-hearted nurse, was adjusting a patient's IV when an unexpected sound caught her attention. It was a soft but insistent cry, seeming to come from the main entrance. With a quick glance at the monitors, she made sure her patients were stable before heading toward that heartbreaking sound. As she opened the emergency room doors, she found a small basket wrapped in blankets. Her heart skipped a beat. Bending down to inspect, she discovered a baby, just a few days old, crying with all its might, as if its entire tiny world depended on being heard. Its skin was red from the cold, and its closed eyes reflected a vulnerability that was soul-crushing. Sarah carefully lifted the baby, holding him close to her chest to warm him as she carried him inside. The entire hospital seemed to stop at the news. Who would have left a baby there? The authorities were notified immediately, but as the hours passed, it became clear there were no clues about the parents or the reason for the abandonment. Sarah couldn't take her eyes off the little one. Something in his innocent gaze, in the way he curled up in her arms, awoke a protective instinct she had never felt before. Days passed, and the investigation went nowhere. The authorities, faced with a lack of evidence, began to treat the case with less priority. Sarah, however, couldn't ignore the baby. "I can't let this child end up in a system that won't care for him as he deserves," she thought. In a decision that would change her life forever, she would adopt him, protect him, and love him as if he were her own. The process wasn't easy. There was endless paperwork, interviews with social workers, and inquisitive looks from colleagues who questioned how a nurse with a modest salary could take on a baby. But Sarah was not intimidated. The day she received official confirmation that she could be the child's legal guardian, she cried tears of joy. She named him Lucas, a name that resonated with hope and strength, two qualities she knew he would need to have a better life. The years passed, and Lucas grew up in a home full of love, even if it was humble. Sarah worked long hours, but every free moment was dedicated to her little boy. Together, they built a routine that was far from luxurious, but was filled with laughter and tenderness. However, Sarah couldn't ignore the limitations of their situation. Every time she saw the spark of curiosity in Lucas's eyes, or heard him talk with enthusiasm about everything he wanted to learn, she felt a weight in her chest. "This child deserves more opportunities," she told herself. With this determination, Sarah began to plan a drastic change. She had heard about St. Jude's Hospital, a prestigious institution in the big city, known for its standards of excellence as well as its high demands. She submitted her resume, hoping that an opportunity there could give Lucas the future he deserved. When she received the job offer, she felt a mix of emotion and fear. Could they adapt to life in such a big city? How would Lucas react to leaving behind the only home he had ever known? The day of the move was bittersweet. Sarah packed their few belongings, while Lucas ran around the house, gathering his favorite toys. Before closing the door for the last time, Sarah allowed herself a moment to look around. That home had been a refuge in difficult times, but now it represented the beginning of a new chapter. The arrival in the city was a reality shock. The noise, the lights, and the hustle and bustle contrasted sharply with the calm of their small town. Sarah tried to hide her nervousness, while Lucas, with his big, curious eyes, seemed fascinated by everything. When she arrived at St. Jude's Hospital, Sarah felt that all her effort was worth it. It was an imposing place, with a professional atmosphere that reflected the seriousness of its reputation. The first day was exhausting. Meeting the team, getting familiar with the protocols, and making sure Lucas felt comfortable in their new home occupied every minute. However, as she lay down that night, exhausted but satisfied, she couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement. She knew the challenges were great, but so were the opportunities. What Sarah didn't know was that her arrival at St. Jude's Hospital would not only mean a change in her career, but also in her heart. But St. Jude's Hospital, with its pristine hallways and constant flow of patients and staff, seemed to have a life of its own. Among the many professionals who walked its corridors, Dr. Ethan Black stood out as an imposing figure. Chief physician and owner of the hospital, Ethan was a man who radiated authority. His serious and always concentrated face was a barrier few dared to cross. His reputation as a brilliant surgeon was impeccable, but it was also known that he was distant, cold, and with a personal life carefully closed off from others. Sarah first saw him during a team meeting. He was standing at the front, reviewing surgical procedures with a precision that bordered on perfection. His voice, deep and confident, resonated in the room as everyone else listened attentively. To Sarah, a newcomer, Ethan was intimidating, but there was something in his gaze that seemed familiar. A subtle sadness, hidden behind his impenetrable exterior, awakened a curiosity in her that she couldn't explain. The first direct contact between the two was brief, but revealing. Sarah had been reviewing a patient's chart when Ethan approached to ask for details about a procedure he was about to perform. "Are you the new nurse?" he asked, his tone dry but polite. "Yes, Sarah Miller," she replied with a smile that, though it wasn't returned, didn't fade. The interaction was quick, but Sarah noticed how Ethan avoided eye contact for more than a few seconds, as if he feared someone might see beyond his facade. As the days passed, their interactions became more frequent. Although Ethan continued to maintain a professional distance, he couldn't help but notice the way Sarah treated her patients. There was something about her, a genuine warmth that seemed to illuminate even the most difficult situations. One night, while they were reviewing a complicated case together, Ethan surprised himself by watching her as she spoke. Her voice was soft but firm, and her presence had a calmness that contrasted with the intensity of her work. "Dr. Black, is everything all right?" Sarah asked, noticing that he had been silent for longer than usual. "Yes, excuse me. I was thinking," he replied, quickly averting his gaze. It was a brief moment, but enough for Ethan to realize that Sarah made him feel something he had avoided for years: vulnerability. Ethan's past was a shadow that followed him everywhere. Years ago, he had been deeply in love with Clara, a woman who, with her charisma and beauty, had captured his heart. But one day, without warning, she disappeared, taking with her not only his love, but also his trust in people. Since then, Ethan had buried his emotions under layers of work and professional perfection, closing the door to any relationship that could break down his defenses. However, Sarah's presence was different. She wasn't trying to break anything. She was simply there, with her constant smile and her way of making even the most chaotic days a little more bearable. One afternoon, while they were reviewing a pediatric case, Sarah let out a laugh as she recalled something funny that Lucas, her son, had said that morning. "He has an incredible sense of humor for a 4-year-old, though I don't know if it's a good or bad thing that he knows how to imitate me, too," she said, laughing softly. Ethan, who rarely showed any emotion outside the operating room, allowed a small smile to appear on his lips. It was such an unexpected gesture that Sarah noticed it immediately. "I did it," she joked. "I made you smile. I should mark this day on the calendar." "Don't get too excited. It's rare, but not impossible," he replied, with a glint of dry humor in his tone. That was the start of something new. Although Ethan remained reserved, Sarah managed to find small chinks in his armor. Through casual conversations, shared moments in the break room, and collaborations on challenging medical cases, the two began to get to know each other. But just as that connection seemed to be strengthening, Ethan's past returned to haunt him. One afternoon, as Sarah was finishing up some files, she heard an unusual murmur among the hospital staff. As she turned the corner, she saw a tall, elegant woman with an overwhelming presence standing in front of Ethan in the main hallway. Their faces were tense, and although she couldn't hear what they were saying, Sarah felt an unease she couldn't explain. The arrival of that woman, unknown to Sarah, but clearly important to Ethan, marked the beginning of a storm that would test everything they had begun to build. What would you do if a person from your past who hurt you came back and tried to stir up old feelings? What's your first instinct? The silence in the hospital hallway was palpable, broken only by the echo of Clara's footsteps as she walked toward Ethan. Her figure, impeccable and confident, seemed to dominate the space. Sarah watched from a corner, feeling a weight on her chest that she couldn't quite understand. The intensity on Ethan's face, a man accustomed to controlling his emotions, was disconcerting. His clenched jaw and the tension in his shoulders spoke of a mix of surprise and contained fury. "Ethan," Clara began, her voice soft, but with a hint of defiance. "I know you didn't expect to see me, but we have a lot to talk about." Ethan crossed his arms, trying to stay firm. His words were short, almost clipped. "I have nothing to say to you, Clara. You had years to talk, but you just disappeared." The coldness in his tone didn't seem to affect her. Clara took another step closer, her eyes searching Ethan's with a mix of defiance and something that could be interpreted as regret. From a distance, Sarah felt that something profound was about to be unleashed. "You don't know the whole truth," Clara replied, with an air of mystery that only increased the tension. Sarah couldn't help but take a step back, feeling like an intruder in a moment that didn't belong to her. However, an insatiable curiosity kept her there, listening from a distance, while her heart pounded. "What truth?" Ethan retorted, with a spark of anger in his voice. "The truth is you left me without an explanation. You left me thinking I had done something wrong, that I wasn't good enough." "Is that the truth?" Clara exhaled slowly, as if she were gathering the courage to release a burden she had carried for years. "I was pregnant, Ethan." The air seemed to disappear from the hallway. Sarah felt the world around her stop. Ethan, for his part, stood motionless, his expression shifting from disbelief to a mix of confusion and pain. "What are you saying?" His voice, for the first time, lost its controlled tone. Clara kept her gaze fixed on him, but her face showed something akin to remorse for an instant. "When I left, I was pregnant. I didn't know how to handle it, Ethan. I thought I couldn't face it with you or with anyone. So I left." Ethan took a step back, as if Clara's words had physically struck him. "What happened to the baby?" he asked finally, his voice a whisper loaded with a mix of fear and desperation. Clara lowered her gaze for a moment before facing him again. "I was completely desperate, Ethan," Clara said, her voice trembling with the weight of the words. "When I realized I was pregnant, I had already decided I couldn't keep the baby. I didn't have documents with me, so I used a fake name at the hospital where I was treated. That same night, in a torrential downpour, as soon as I was discharged, I took my son and left him at the emergency room door. I knew someone would find him and care for him. I didn't have the courage to look back." She paused, her eyes fixed on the floor, unable to look at Ethan as she continued. I thought I was doing the right thing, but the truth is I was a coward. I simply abandoned him in the rain, trusting that someone else would take care of him. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at Ethan, but his face remained impassive, each word stabbing him like a knife. I know what I did was wrong, but at that moment, I felt I had no other choice, she continued, struggling to stay firm. I was afraid to face you, afraid of failing as a mother, so I ran away. The confession left the air heavy between them, each detail making it more difficult for Ethan to process what he had just heard. Ethan's face contorted, his mind trying to process the words. From her position, Sarah felt a knot in her stomach. Every detail she heard made a terrifying thought begin to form in her mind. You abandoned him? Ethan's voice rose, his pain turning into anger. He was my son, our son, and you just left him. Clara tried to defend herself, but Ethan raised a hand to stop her. His emotions were on the verge of collapsing, and his breathing became irregular. Clara took the opportunity to deliver the final blow. You'll never find him, Ethan. Not you or anyone. Those words seemed designed to hurt, and they did. Ethan recoiled, his gaze lost in a void that only he could see. Clara turned, and, with an expression of triumph mixed with bitterness, disappeared down the hallway, leaving Ethan shattered. Sarah, paralyzed, felt the pieces begin to fit together in her mind. The dates, the circumstances, it all matched. Lucas, the boy she had found in the emergency room on that rainy night. Could it be possible? The idea was overwhelming, but also impossible to ignore. When she finally gathered the courage to approach him, she found Ethan leaning against the wall, his breathing heavy and his gaze lost. Sarah hesitated before speaking, but she knew she had to. Dr. Black. Her voice was soft, as if she didn't want to break him any more than he already was. Ethan looked up, and for the first time, Sarah saw a raw pain in his eyes. It wasn't the distant, controlled man she had known. He was someone broken, desperately searching for something he didn't know if he could get back. There's something I need to tell you, Sarah continued, her heart pounding. I'm not sure, but I think I know the child Clara was talking about. Sarah's words made Ethan look at her with intensity, his expression changing from confusion to urgent interest. What do you mean? He asked, his voice trembling slightly. Sarah swallowed, knowing that what she was about to say could change everything. Lucas, the boy I found 4 years ago in the emergency room. I think he could be your son. The silence that followed was overwhelming, but Ethan's gaze was no longer one of desperation. It was now filled with a mix of hope and fear, as if he was about to jump into a void without knowing if he would find the ground or wings to support him. Ethan remained motionless, processing Sarah's words. The idea that Lucas, the boy who had come to mean so much to her, could be his son, filled him with conflicting emotions. There was hope, but also fear, and deep down, a growing anxiety to discover the truth. Sarah, for her part, noticed the intensity in his gaze, and although she knew the revelation would be a strong blow, she was convinced that she had to face it. We need to know for sure, Ethan said finally, his voice low but firm, as if each word cost him a monumental effort. Sarah nodded. I agree. We can't live with this uncertainty. The process of the DNA test was meticulous and tense. Ethan insisted on handling every detail personally, ensuring there was no room for error. Sarah, although sure that the dates and circumstances pointed to Lucas being his son, couldn't help but feel a mix of unease and sadness. If her suspicions were correct, Lucas would finally have his biological father. But what would that mean for her? On the day the results arrived, the atmosphere was charged with nervousness. Ethan held the envelope in his hands, his face impassive, although Sarah knew that inside, he was on the verge of collapse. They sat in his office, a cold and organized space that at that moment felt more claustrophobic than ever. Ethan opened the envelope carefully, but his breathing became erratic as he read the first lines. He closed his eyes for an instant, as if he needed to gather the strength to face reality. Finally, he held out the paper to Sarah without a word. She took it with trembling hands and read the words that confirmed what they both already suspected. Lucas was Ethan's son. A torrent of emotions washed over her. On one hand, there was the joy that Lucas finally had a connection with his father. But on the other, a shadow of insecurity began to grow inside her. "He's my son," Ethan murmured, almost to himself, with a mix of astonishment and sadness in his voice. He looked up at Sarah, and for an instant, he seemed to see comfort in her. But that connection quickly broke, replaced by something darker. Doubt. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked suddenly, his tone turning cold. Sarah blinked, surprised by the change in his attitude. "Ethan, I didn't know. All of this was a coincidence. I had no way of knowing." He got up from the chair, beginning to pace back and forth in the office, his frustration evident. "Coincidence? Do you really expect me to believe that? You found my son. You raised him. And now you expect me to just accept that you never tried to find me?" Ethan's words fell like blows. Sarah felt a lump in her throat, but she forced herself to stand firm. "I did the best I could for Lucas. I found him abandoned, Ethan. I knew nothing about you, or Clara, or your past. Everything I did was out of love, not for profit." But Ethan didn't seem to listen. The shadow of Clara's manipulations and years of mistrust blinded him. "What if all of this was a way for you to get close to me?" he continued, his words laden with venom. "That's unfair!" Sarah exclaimed, unable to contain herself. She got up from the chair, facing him directly. "You have no right to accuse me of something like that. All I have done is care for Lucas, love him as if he were my own, without knowing who his father was." The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan, visibly affected, looked away. But the words were already said. Sarah felt something inside her break. She couldn't stay there, not after everything that had happened. "I can't do this, Ethan. If you can't trust me, there's no point in me staying here," she said, her voice broken. Ethan looked up, but said nothing. His pride and his confusion kept him paralyzed, unable to stop her. That same night, Sarah packed her bags. Lucas, innocent and oblivious to the emotional turmoil around him, helped her pack his things, asking enthusiastically if they were going back home. Sarah, with tears held back, assured him that everything would be all right. As they drove out of the city, Ethan watched from a hospital window. His heart was shattered, but his wounded pride kept him trapped in a place of silent regret. He had lost his son, and with him, the woman who had started to give him a sense of hope. The emptiness that remained in her absence was unbearable, and although Ethan tried to convince himself that it was better this way, a part of him knew that he had made a mistake that could cost him everything. The nights in Ethan's apartment had become endless. The silence weighed as heavily as his guilt, and the absence of Sarah and Lucas was a constant reminder of his mistake. He had convinced himself that the accusations were justified, that Sarah had manipulated the situation to get closer to him. But every time he closed his eyes, the image of her pained face and her truthful words haunted him. "I did everything out of love, not for profit." That phrase resonated in his mind, like an open wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. Ethan knew that he had acted out of anger, that he had let his fears and Clara's manipulations blind him. Now, all he felt was a deep emptiness. His son, his own blood, was out of his reach, and the woman who had started to give him hope had left him behind. Days turned into weeks. Ethan avoided social gatherings. His colleagues noticed his distraction, and the hospital, which used to be his refuge, felt cold and desolate. One night, sitting in his study with a glass of whiskey in his hand, he finally faced the truth. He had ruined everything, not for lack of love, but for his inability to trust. And if he didn't do something about it, he would lose the only thing that truly mattered, forever. He decided he could no longer stand by. The fear of rejection was overwhelming, but more terrifying was the thought of a life without Lucas and Sarah. That same night, he booked a flight to Sarah's hometown. The journey was long, both in miles and in the number of thoughts that tormented him. Ethan mentally rehearsed what he would say, but no words seemed enough to repair the damage. When he arrived in the small town, the contrast with his life in the big city was evident. The quiet streets and modest houses were a reflection of the world Sarah had once described with so much affection. Ethan drove to an address he had discreetly obtained from the hospital, feeling his anxiety grow with every passing mile. Finally, he arrived in front of a simple house with a well-kept garden. The sound of children's laughter stopped him for a moment. Through the window, he could see Lucas playing on the floor with a toy car, while Sarah watched him with a warm smile. The scene hit him like a reminder of what he could have had and what he was about to lose if he didn't find the right words. He took a deep breath and knocked on the door. A few seconds passed that seemed like an eternity before Sarah appeared. When she saw him, her expression changed from surprise to something more complex, a mix of sadness, caution, and perhaps a spark of emotion that she tried to hide. "What are you doing here, Ethan?" she asked, her tone more neutral than he had expected. "I need to talk to you, Sarah. Please, give me a moment." She hesitated. Her instinct told her to close the door and protect the small world she had rebuilt, but something in Ethan's gaze stopped her. Finally, she nodded and stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind her. "I don't know what you expect to say that can change what happened," she began, crossing her arms like a shield. "You made it very clear what you thought of me." Ethan looked down for a moment before speaking, his voice heavy with emotion. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I'm more sorry than I can express. I was blinded by my own anger, by my fears. I didn't trust you when I should have, and that was an unforgivable mistake." Sarah watched him cautiously, his words resonating with her. But it wasn't enough. "And now you expect me to just forget what you said? To trust someone who accused me of something so cruel?" Ethan took another step closer, his gaze filled with a sincerity he hadn't shown before. "I don't expect you to forgive me easily. I know I hurt you, and I probably don't deserve your trust. But I'm here because I can't go on without trying. I can't lose you or Lucas." The name of his son on Ethan's lips made Sarah feel a lump in her throat. She could see that he was being honest, but the wound was still fresh. "This isn't just about me, Ethan. It's about Lucas. He trusts me, and I won't allow someone to come into his life just to break his heart." "I understand," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "But I promise I will do whatever it takes to prove that I can be the father Lucas deserves and the man you need." The silence between them was heavy, filled with unsaid emotions. Sarah looked away, trying to gather her thoughts, while Ethan waited, his heart pounding. He had planted his seed of repentance, but the future was still uncertain. Sarah remained silent for a long moment, looking toward the horizon as Ethan's words echoed in her mind. There was something different about him this time, a vulnerability she had never seen before. But there was also the weight of the recent wounds, of the words that had hurt her so deeply. However, thinking of Lucas, of his innocent laughter and bright eyes, she felt that the possibility of giving him something bigger, something complete, was worth the risk. Finally, She took a deep breath and looked him directly in the eyes. "Ethan, this isn't going to be easy. I don't fully trust you yet, but I want to believe you can change. For Lucas, and for what I feel for you." Ethan's eyes shone with palpable relief, although his face still showed respect for the barriers she had put up. He took a step toward her, but maintained his distance, as if he understood that his approach had to be careful. "Thank you, Sarah. I won't let you down. I'll do everything I can to prove that I can be the man and the father you both need." She nodded, still with some caution, but with a spark of hope growing inside her. At that moment, the door of the house burst open, and Lucas appeared with his toy car in hand, looking at them with curiosity. "Mom, who is he?" he asked, with the innocent frankness of a child. Sarah knelt down to be at his height and stroked his hair. "Lucas, this is Ethan. He's a very important person who wants to get to know you better." The boy looked at him carefully, as if evaluating him, before smiling and extending his car toward him. "Want to play?" Ethan, surprised by the ease with which the boy accepted him, knelt to his level and took the car carefully. "Of course, Lucas. I'd love to." That small gesture was a first step, but for Sarah, it was enough to see that maybe, just maybe, this could work. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions. Ethan stayed in the town, renting a small apartment near Sarah's house. He didn't want to impose his presence, but he sought every opportunity to show her and Lucas that he was willing to be a part of their lives. He took Lucas to the park, helped him build block castles, and sat patiently to listen to the endless stories a 4-year-old could invent. Sarah watched it all with caution at first, but over time, she began to notice genuine changes in Ethan. He wasn't the distant, controlled man she had known at the hospital. Now, he was someone who allowed himself to laugh, who knelt on the floor to play, and who wasn't afraid to show his love for his son. One afternoon, while Lucas was napping, Ethan and Sarah sat in the small garden of her house. The sunlight bathed the place, and there was a comfortable silence between them. "I never imagined this would be possible," Ethan said finally, breaking the silence. "To have Lucas in my life. And you." Sarah looked at him, her expression softening. "Me neither. But sometimes the most unexpected things are the ones that are most worth it." He took her hand carefully, as if still fearing she might pull it away. "I want us to be a family, Sarah. Not just for Lucas, but because I can't imagine my life without you." Tears filled Sarah's eyes, but this time they were not of sadness. She nodded slowly, her fingers intertwining with his. "I want that too, Ethan. But we have to do it right together." Over time, they managed to build a life that neither of them had imagined. They returned to the city, where Ethan, with Sarah's support, began to be a present and loving father. Lucas blossomed under their affection, and his laughter filled the house they now shared. One warm afternoon, as the three of them strolled through a park, Ethan stopped to take a photo of Sarah and Lucas. They were both laughing, playing with a ball. When Sarah looked at him, she saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Peace. "What?" she asked, amused. "Nothing," he replied, lowering the camera. "I'm just thinking about how lucky I am." Lucas ran toward them at that moment, tugging on their hands. Come on, let's play together." Sarah and Ethan exchanged a smile before joining him. That small moment, filled with laughter and love, was the beginning of a new chapter. A family, against all odds, built on a foundation of forgiveness, effort, and hope. And as they played under the sun, Sarah couldn't help but think that this was only the beginning of a much bigger story. The afternoon sun filtered through the white curtains of the house, softly illuminating the home that Ethan and Sarah had built together. The sounds of children's laughter resonated from the garden, where Lucas, now 9 years old, was playing with enthusiasm, while Ethan chased him with a ball in his hands. "You can't catch me, Dad!" Lucas shouted, teasing him as he ran with agility across the lawn. From the kitchen, Sarah watched the scene with a smile. Her hand instinctively rested on her rounded belly, where her little Elena was growing strong. At 6 months pregnant, the baby's gentle but firm movements were a constant reminder of the love and union that had blossomed between her and Ethan. The doorbell interrupted her thoughts. Sarah walked slowly to the entrance, her figure radiant in a blue dress that delicately hugged her pregnancy. When she opened it, she found her neighbor with a bouquet of fresh flowers. "Sarah, these are for you. I just wanted to congratulate you again on little Elena," the woman said, handing her the bouquet. "Thank you, Martha. That's so kind of you," Sarah replied, with a warmth that had come to characterize her. Back in the garden, Ethan finally caught Lucas, lifting him into the air as they both laughed heartily. It was a simple moment, but one loaded with meaning. Years ago, Ethan would never have imagined he would have this life, a family full of love, laughter, and a tranquility that had always eluded him. When Sarah came out to the garden with the bouquet in her hands, Ethan put Lucas down and walked toward her. Their eyes met, and for an instant, the world seemed to stand still. "How are you, my love?" Ethan asked, placing a protective hand on her belly. "I'm good, but I think Elena has been practicing her karate moves again," Sarah replied with a soft laugh. Ethan knelt down and placed his ear against her belly. "Listen, little Elena, don't get too excited in there. We want to meet you in a few months, not before." Sarah laughed, and Lucas ran toward them, hugging his mother by the waist. "When is my little sister going to get here?" he asked with a child's impatience. "Very soon, sweetheart. But in the meantime, you have to be patient," Sarah replied, stroking her son's hair. The family sat on a blanket under the largest tree in the garden, sharing a simple snack of fruits and juices. Ethan, always attentive, made sure Sarah was comfortable, placing a cushion behind her back. "You know, I never imagined I would be this happy," Ethan said suddenly, looking at Sarah with a mix of gratitude and love. She took his hand and squeezed it gently. "Me neither, but it was all worth it." Lucas, oblivious to the moment, pointed enthusiastically to the sky. "Look, a cloud shaped like a rabbit." The family's laughter filled the air as they all looked up, enjoying the simple pleasure of being together. Later, as the sun began to set, Ethan hugged Sarah from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder as they watched Lucas run among the flowers. His hand slid toward Sarah's belly, feeling a small kick from Elena. "Our future is here," he whispered. "In you, in Lucas, in our little Elena." I couldn't ask for anything more. Sarah turned her head slightly to look at him, her eyes shining with love. "It's because we built all of this together, Ethan, and we're just getting started." With the sky painted in shades of orange and pink, the family was enveloped in a sense of peace and fullness. This was only the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with love, hope, and the infinite possibilities that the future promised them. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. If this story of love, overcoming adversity, and hope resonated with you, don't forget to leave a like and share your opinion in the comments. Your support is very important to us, and we love to know what you think. Thanks for coming with us this far, and until the next exciting story that will undoubtedly touch your heart.